The last bonus I ever got came in a manila envelope. No ceremony, no handshake. Just a check slid under my office door with a post-it that said, "Good work, kid." I was 38, been at the company 6 years, built every major partner relationship they had, knew every API handshake better than I knew my own tax ID, and yet I was still kid, cute, disposable, like a coffee filter after a 12-hour sprint to hit Q3 rollout. I should have seen it coming when they reorganized the floor and stuck me next to the industrial printer. You know the one. It groans louder than your ex during small claims court and smells like burnt ink and broken dreams. But I stayed quiet. I smiled in meetings. I debugged integration issues at 3 a.m. while the VP of Ops was off glamping in Colorado. I was the director of strategic partnerships, which is corporate for she's the one who actually reads the contracts before we sign them. What they never saw was what I was building after hours. While they were sucking down kombucha and farting out jargon like synergy, I was in a dingy co-working space downtown, sketching server diagrams on napkins with Amir and Liz, two ex-colleagues who, like me, had been quietly discarded by flashier firms. We didn't have funding. We had fury. We had a vision for a lean, resilient API infrastructure stack that wouldn't buckle under stress like a trust fund intern on espresso. I wasn't trying to stick it to anyone, not at first. We just wanted something that worked, something we owned. I kept it quiet, no LinkedIn brags, no Medium posts, no launch party with a $600 neon sign. Just code, contracts, and caffeine. And for the record, yeah, I still had access to my old email alerts. Occupational hazard. You spend 6 years in vendor ops, you learn to track everything. Even ghosts leave footprints if you know where to look. Oh, and hey, if you've made it this far without smashing the subscribe button or tossing a like into the void, fix that. It takes 2 seconds and it genuinely keeps my crew from defecting to a TikTok slime channel. We tell these stories for folks like you. Don't ghost us. Back to it. My name wasn't on any patents. Never made it to the About Us page. But if you dug into the source files, the vendor contracts, the Jira boards, I was everywhere. I had fingerprinted every damn integration they used to scale. The Tier 2 identity verification module? Mine. The customer onboarding flow that shaved sign-up time in half? Mine. The emergency failover playbook they bragged about in investor calls? You guessed it. But that's the thing about invisible work. People only see what they choose to value, and what they valued apparently was show ponies. I watched the new COO arrive like a stiff breeze in a rented blazer, all slick hair and LinkedIn quotes. He spoke in bullets: cut burn, max ROI, optimize headcount. I was a name on a spreadsheet he didn't recognize. That made me a liability, so I kept building. Nights, weekends, spaghetti staining my laptop in diners that hadn't updated their menus since Bush was in office. Our little startup, still unnamed, was fast becoming a real backbone. We weren't sexy, but we were stable. That's all you need to be if you want to survive the blood sport of back-end services. And then came the reorg. It wasn't loud. No town hall. No goodbye bagel spread. Just a one-liner from HR and a calendar invite that reads strategic realignment discussion. I knew what that meant. So I put on my good shoes, printed a clean copy of my NDA, and walked into the room smiling. Bonuses, the new COO said, not even looking up from his iPad, are for assets, darling, not for overhead. That was the last sentence I ever heard from him as an employee. But not the last sentence he'd ever hear from me. The reorg memo hit like a silent fart, no sound, all stink. Dropped at 4:59 p.m. on a Friday, wrapped in pastel corporate speak. Realigning resources to better serve our growth trajectory. Translation, bloodbath incoming. The kind of email where everyone opens Slack just to see who's freaking out the loudest. By Monday, the air was different, tense, like the office had been dipped in febres and lies. Then he arrived. The new COO, Travis, wore loafers with no socks and smiled like a man who's never changed his own oil. He didn't sit, he perched like a TED talk in human form, carried a water bottle big enough to bench press. His first act, renaming our monthly performance meetings to accountability acceleration zones. Second act, gutting 3 departments before lunch. He made his way down the org chart like a surgeon who read the manual upside down. I watched him from my seat by the industrial printer sipping gas station coffee that tasted like burnt regrets. He shook hands like he was trying to remember who you were while already planning how to replace you. When he finally got to me, it was in front of my entire team. "This is right. You're the partnerships person, yeah? Director of Strategic Partnerships," I replied, still smiling. He laughed. Relationship overhead. My team went quiet, like someone had unplugged the room. I felt my cheeks flush, not with shame, but with the kind of clarity that comes right before a car crash. I nodded, didn't flinch. Just filed it away, right next to bonuses are for assets, darling. That one came 2 days later. During the quarterly bonus meeting, he somehow turned into a stand-up roast. He cut 3 high performers, dropped their responsibilities on a junior staff, and announced we'd be streamlining overhead. And he pointed his stylus at me like it was a bayonet. "Let's be honest," he said, with a smirk and no soul behind his eyes. "We need engineers, not lunch dates and loyalty programs." Funny thing is, I had engineering credentials. I just never led with them. I let the value of my deals speak for themselves, but Travis didn't read documents, he read vibes, and mine, apparently, weren't synergistic enough. The elimination email came that night. Subject line, strategic realignment outcome. No phone call, no meeting, just an auto-generated message with a link to schedule my offboarding. Benefits cut off in 14 days. Equipment pickup to be arranged. A generic thank you for your contributions dropped in at the end like sprinkles on a turd. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't even text my work friends. I packed my things in silence, unplugged my keyboard like it was a life support machine, slipped my office keycard into an envelope and left it in the top drawer. I took one last look at my glassed-in cubicle and thought, may your next API rollout crash and burn, you spreadsheet-loving buffoons. On the Uber ride home, I didn't stew. I didn't vent. I opened Slack and typed 6 words to Amir and Liz, our private founder thread still buried beneath workday noise. It's time. Let's light it up. No reply, just 2 flame emojis. By the time I got home, Liz had already bought the domain name. Amir had spun up our infrastructure for stress testing. My old badge still worked on their API dashboard, so I downloaded a month's worth of error logs for sport. Not to sabotage, just to know how fast the cracks would spread once they tried to optimize the platform without the person who designed its damn arteries. Travis had taken me out of the building, but he didn't even know what I'd built under it. Monday morning, I didn't sleep in. I didn't rage post. I didn't drive to a lake and hurl my company laptop into the water like some budget drama queen. I brewed the strongest coffee this side of chemical warfare, put on my oldest hoodie, the one with the ketchup stain shaped like Florida, and walked into our new office, Liz's garage. Smelled like WD-40 and ambition. And in that sacred, duct-taped temple of caffeine and code, I began my second life. We weren't just building anymore, we were launching. Our little ghost of a startup, once just sketches and spite, got a real name, something crisp, clean, ungoogleable on purpose. Liz ran point on branding. Amir rewrote our SDK to make it so slick it practically apologized for existing. I dove into business dev like it was a blood sport, chasing contracts while the taste of Travis's overhead slur still burned on the back of my tongue. Within 6 weeks, we signed 2 contracts. Not whales, but big enough to matter. Big enough to put us on the map if we wanted to be on the map. But I didn't, not yet. We moved in shadows, no Crunchbase profile, no tech crunch puff piece. We didn't tweet, we didn't even breathe unless it served the code. One of those contracts, a tier 2 vendor you've never heard of. If you've ever opened a checking account online, you've used them. And guess who they powered? My old employer's entire customer onboarding flow. Passport scans, SSN verification, instant KYC, all of it ran through the sleepy little vendor we now own from the back end. Not directly, of course, we were their vendor. 2 layers removed, but we had our hands in the plumbing now. And the faucets, oh, they were dripping already. I kept it surgical. No LinkedIn update. No revenge tour. No passive-aggressive TikToks. I let the silence do the screaming. Amir set up monitoring alerts so aggressive they pinged us when someone sneezed near a data center. Liz built out a dashboard so elegant it made Tableau cry. And I handled the client side, quiet calls, whispered walkthroughs, contracts written like booby traps with SLA clauses tight enough to strangle. We knew our old company was still running on our former architecture. Travis had cut their ops team by 40% and handed infrastructure to a consulting firm that treated APIs like IKEA furniture, jam it together, ignore the leftover screws. So when the errors started trickling in, latency spikes, timeout flutters, ghost bugs that only showed up under load, I knew exactly what was coming. And then it did. A ding. My phone lit up. A ghost from the past. I'd set a rule in Gmail years ago to forward anything tagged as high priority ops from my old inbox. Just in case. Most of the time it was noise, calendar invites, status updates, corporate fluff. But this one, subject, Q3 firefighting, API issues from internal ops atrodacted. Com time, 2:13 a.m. It was a war room meeting. High priority, all hands, scheduled for Thursday. I stared at it like a fortune cookie dipped in gasoline. My old company didn't know they were bleeding yet, but they were already calling in the medics. The body of the invite said, root cause unknown, possible vendor failure, impacting user onboarding rates, escalating to CTO. They had no clue we were the vendor behind the vendor. No clue the code they were cursing was now ours. No clue the SDK they'd bastardized beyond recognition was hanging by a thread. And that I held the scissors. I took a sip of coffee and smiled. Let them burn, Amir said, reading over my shoulder. No, I replied, let them beg. The first outage hit on a Tuesday, right before their big frictionless identity rollout. You know, the one they promised would reduce onboarding time to under 10 seconds. They'd plastered it all over their Q3 investor deck, complete with slick animations and fake screenshots. Total vapor. Travis probably rehearsed the announcement in front of his Peloton. 7 minutes into the deployment window, their customer verification flow choked on itself. Users couldn't upload documents. ID parsing failed at random. Response times ballooned like a server on NyQuil. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to flood their support chat with confused clients and unverified accounts. They thought it was a fluke, blamed the load balancer, then blamed the dev team, then blamed cloud latency, whatever that means when you're paying 6 figures a month to AWS. But I knew, because the API logs were right in front of me, flowing into our admin console in real time like a live-action karmic slideshow. They'd ripped out the custom throttling layer I wrote, my layer, the one that prevented bottlenecks by smoothing traffic during burst loads. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't even well documented, but it worked. Travis probably saw it and thought dead code, redundant. He was the kind of guy who deleted comments in code because they made it harder to vibe. They kept pushing updates. We kept watching them eat dirt. Week 2, their passwordless login feature broke in Brazil. Localization failed. Their form validator rejected entire cities as invalid inputs. Users from Sao Paulo were told they didn't exist. Week 3, images stopped loading in the mobile onboarding app. PNGs timed out. Logs showed that a single overloaded call to our API via their proxy layer, which they'd rewritten with duct tape and hubris, caused a cascade failure in the image fetch service. Each time our logs were clean, our infra stable. No breached SLAs. On paper, we were saints. But internally, they were in hell. Support tickets started piling up from their Tier 2 vendor, our client. First, just a few polite inquiries, then frantic escalations. The kind that begin with "hi there" and end with "we're considering termination for breach." Their team opened 5 P1 support tickets in 3 days. Meanwhile, we sipped cold brew and wrote polite replies. Per our SLA, latency thresholds remain within acceptable limits. Please ensure your SDK version is 2.4.1 or above. Custom implementations outside our recommended flow may cause instability. Translation, you broke it, now lie in it. Liz and Amir started a Slack channel just to collect their increasingly desperate bug reports. We called it #oopsie-doopsie. Every time they tried to patch the holes, they made it worse, like trying to fix a leaky faucet with a garden hose and prayer. Internally, I felt complicated. Part smug satisfaction, part acid reflux. These were people I'd worked beside for years. Not all of them were Travis clones. Some were decent folks. But none of them stopped the blade when it came for my neck. None of them asked, are we sure we want to cut the person who built half our backend with duct tape and midnight panic? So I stopped caring. I watched as their Slack screenshots leaked to Reddit, as users complained on X, nay Twitter, about onboarding delays and vanished documents. I watched as Travis pushed out another corporate blog post, "We're committed to excellence," while his team panic-installed patch after patch on a house built of spaghetti and forgotten dependencies. And still, they blamed the vendor. They blamed us. They had no idea I was sitting 3 feet from the person writing their ticket replies. No idea that the product specialist on the call was Liz with a voice mod and 0 patience. No idea the line of code they broke was the one I wrote in a diner at 2 a.m., eating cold hash browns and deciding whether to build a kill switch. I didn't need a kill switch now. They were doing it to themselves. One rollout at a time. Their CTO's email came in at 6:42 a.m., a full 38 minutes before his first cup of artisan ego roast, which meant one thing: desperation. Subject line, immediate vendor escalation, critical discussion. No pleasantries, no buffer, just a calendar invite and a line of text that read, "We need a serious conversation. I'm coming in person." Cute. By that point, they'd burned through 4 patch cycles, rolled back 2 features, and somehow managed to create a recursive bug that locked out verified users if they dared to change their address after midnight. We watched the mess unfold like a nature documentary. Travis, the coup, had already started posturing internally, gave an all-hands Zoom pep talk titled "Taking Control of Our Stack," which translated loosely to, "We don't know what we're doing. Someone has to die for it." In that meeting, he said the words, "This vendor's been coddled too long. Might be time we built this thing in-house." Liz spit her coffee out laughing. Amir wrote in-house, LOL on a post-it and stuck it to the server rack. We knew what was coming. These guys didn't want accountability. They wanted a scapegoat, someone to flog publicly, threaten quietly, and then beg privately. So when the CTO demanded a face-to-face, I didn't route it to support. I didn't offer Zoom. I didn't defer to our account manager. I approved it personally. Subject confirmed. Location 9th floor, 325 Lexington Ave. Time Thursday, 10 o'clock a.m. Attendees, CTO, optional, COO if available. I kept the reply short, professional, but I chose our nicest boardroom. Big glass walls, long table, perfect lighting. One of those rooms that makes you forget who's small and who isn't until you've already sat down and realized where the power is. He agreed instantly. I imagine he thought we'd be 2 guys in hoodies, maybe a WeWork booth with a flat tire and a logo printed on a sticker. He was probably ready to lecture us on scalability. Maybe offer a token pay bump and a deadline to get our act together. What he didn't expect was me. In a black blazer I hadn't worn since my last investor round. Me, seated at the head of the table like I never left corporate. Me, flanked by Liz, who had redesigned the SDK from scratch, and Amir, who printed the SLA contract and brought 2 pens. The boardroom was empty but humming. No startup chaos, just quiet control. Screens ready. contracts printed, legal team waiting on standby in the room next door. I scheduled the meeting for Thursday for a reason. That's when their monthly metrics lock. They were one more outage away from blowing their Q3 numbers, and they knew it. Meanwhile, back at their office, Travis was playing dictator, walking around with a Starbucks in false confidence, telling engineers to map out a pivot plan in case we got canned. Spouting stuff like, we'll just rebuild the SDK. How hard can it be? As if backend infrastructure were a fidget spinner. At one point, he told the staff, this company doesn't get to hold us hostage. They're lucky we don't terminate the contract mid-quarter. You could almost hear the ground cracking under him. They thought we were begging to keep the account. They thought they were walking into that room with leverage. They thought wrong. He was 17 minutes late, which would have been fine if he weren't the one who'd requested the meeting like his company's life depended on it. Which, incidentally, it did. When the glass doors finally whooshed open, he entered with the twitchy energy of a man who spent the Uber ride rehearsing threats in the mirror. His leather laptop bag looked expensive. His tie was loose, but not by accident, just enough to say, I'm too important to prep. His chief architect followed close behind, sweating through his polo like a busted HVAC. They stepped into our boardroom, all puffed up protocol and assumed dominance until he saw me. He stopped mid-stride, eyes locked on the head of the table. Then they drifted, left to Liz, who wore a crisp button-down and a look like she'd already diagnosed his company's incompetence. Then to the right, where Amir sat with his laptop open to a full-color SLA dashboard and a printed log history so thick it needed a binder clip. And then his eyes landed on the screen behind me. Vendor status review. Client name redacted presented by my full name managing director, our company, and right under it, in font big enough to be biblical. Let's talk about what you broke. He blinked. Once, twice. Turned slightly toward his architect and whispered, not quiet enough. Who is she? His architect didn't answer. Just looked down at the conference table like he wished it would open and swallow him whole. I waited. Let the silence do the gut punching. Gentlemen, I said finally, thank you for coming. Let's begin by reviewing the service contract you violated last quarter. I clicked the remote. Slide 1, SLA breach timeline. No greetings, no posturing, no offer of water. Their CTO tried to regain control, cleared his throat like he was about to start a sermon. But I didn't give him space. Just advanced the slide again. According to section 4.3, I continued. You agreed to maintain all SDK integrations as outlined in our compatibility documentation. On June 12th, your engineering team deployed a rewrite that bypassed our prescribed throttling layer. Result, 11.2% increase in latency across all Tier 1 GOs. Next slide, graphs, timestamps, call logs, all annotated in red. On July 7th, you removed the fallback queue that protected against load spikes. Result, a cascade failure during your summer surge campaign that cost your company, conservatively, upwards of 1.4 million in blocked conversions. Amir chimed in, voice cool and clean. We actually pulled your own internal reports from your public bug tracker. You logged these as external vendor issues. That's interesting. Their CTO opened his mouth to object, but Liz slid a copy of the contract across the table before he could speak. Her finger tapped a clause. We're generous, she said. This contract allows for 3 service violations before escalation. Your team, I said, has racked up 4. The air in the room changed, not visibly, not loudly, but you could feel it like someone knocked the ego out of the space and replaced it with static. He shifted in his seat. His bravado began to melt, leaving behind the dry, corporate husk of a man who just realized the fire alarm wasn't a drill. I clicked again. Slide competitor migration plan, phase 1. I let him read it, no narration. Just 30 seconds of quiet devastation as he watched a roadmap of their own slow extinction projected 10 feet tall. Finally, I spoke, soft, sharp. You broke what I built, then you blamed us for the wreckage. Now you're here thinking this is a negotiation. It's not. He didn't argue, couldn't. The evidence was too clean, too damning. He just sat there, jaw tight, trying to make eye contact with someone, anyone, who could save him. But there was no one left in the room who owed him anything. I watched him crumble in stages, first in the twitch of his eye when I recapped Violation 1, then in the death grip he had on his stylus by Violation 4. His posture shrank with every bullet point. The man who walked in looking like he owned the room now looked like he was renting fear by the minute. I didn't raise my voice, didn't lean forward, no drama, just facts delivered like surgical incisions. Your dev team, I said, clicking the slide, intentionally bypassed our SDK in June. That's the root of 72% of your current latency issues. Click. In July, you stripped our session validation layer to reduce overhead. That introduced a state mismatch bug that affected every 5th user flow. Click. August. Your proxy layer cached user credentials beyond the TTL window. That's the authentication failure surge your analysts called a third-party degradation event. And in September, you rolled out an unauthorized batch processing routine that hit our servers with malformed requests, spiking our failover alarms and damaging our response rates across 2 zones. I let the weight of it land before continuing. Our SLA, signed by your own legal team, allows for 3 documented violations before we're permitted to suspend services or renegotiate terms. I reached for the final document and laid it in front of him, open to the clause, "You're now at 4." The CTO finally spoke, quietly, like a man bargaining with gravity. We didn't know the SDK requirements were that strict. Amir gave him a look I'd pay to have framed. "You didn't read them," he replied, "and then you customized it like it was a WordPress plugin." Liz added, "Your team treated mission-critical architecture like it was a brunch menu. Now you're choking on the eggs." The CTO's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His architect shifted in his seat, pale and sweating through his lanyard, probably wondering if he should start updating his resume or his will. Then Amir delivered the final twist of the knife. "You've already started migrating your competitors onto the stable branch." Silence. The CTO turned to him slowly, like someone checking if the gunshot was real. "What?" Amir didn't blink. 2 of them. One went live last week. The other signs Monday. Clean SDK implementation. Proper compliance. 0 violations so far. The blood drained from his face. Panic wasn't just cracking through, it was pouring. You could see it in the way his hand hovered above the contract on the table, like touching it might burn him. In the way he suddenly couldn't decide where to look at me at the screen at the door. "Why wasn't I told?" he muttered. "I thought we were exclusive." I cut him off, dead calm. "Exclusivity was voided the moment you violated the service terms. You don't get loyalty after sabotage." His shoulders slumped. For a moment, he didn't look like a CTO. He looked like a middle manager who just realized the 3 a.m. emails, the arrogant hotfixes, the corners they cut weren't just invisible, they were fatal. "And if we fix it?" he asked, clinging to hope like a lifeline made of floss. "You're not here to fix it," I said. "You're here because you already broke it." The pause after that was cavernous. In that space, he finally understood what the meeting really was. Not a negotiation, not a rescue, a reckoning. We weren't fighting for the contract. We owned the road now, and he was standing in the middle of it, watching the truck arrive. He cleared his throat and tried to salvage the last crumb of power he had left. "Look, we're obviously not happy with how this played out, but we're still interested in continuing the partnership under the right terms." I almost admired the effort. Almost. The way he smoothed his tie like that could glue his credibility back together. The way he leaned forward, elbows on the table, assuming proximity equaled influence. He still thought this was salvageable, that a half apology and a vague promise to circle back on governance would get him a discount. Amir slid the new MSA across the table before he could finish the thought. Twice the cost, prepaid annually. No discounts. No exceptions. Full adherence to SDK architecture. Violation penalties indexed quarterly. Mandatory compliance audit every 6 months. He stared at the paper like it was radioactive. "This is steep," he muttered, blinking hard. "You realize we've already paid for the quarter." Liz didn't even look up from her laptop. "Your breach voided the credit carryover. You're not a customer with credit. You're a liability with paperwork." He flinched. "We can walk," he said, voice low, trying it on for size. "You can," I replied. "But your legal team might want to take a look at our documentation first. We've cataloged every SLA breach, every rollback, every executive email passed through our ticket system." I leaned back, folded my hands, and let the next part hang in the air like a loaded gun. "If this partnership dissolves without resolution, we're contractually permitted to publish anonymized breach reports to affected ecosystem partners." His forehead dotted with sweat, beads forming just beneath his perfect hairline, probably wondering who had seen the performance logs, who already suspected, who was waiting for a reason to panic. "You'd tank us." "No," I said, smiling just enough for it to hurt. "You already did that. We'd just be illuminating the wreckage." He looked down at the contract again, this time longer, reading not with resistance but resignation. He didn't ask for changes. He didn't counter. The bluff was over. There was no bluff left. He knew it. We knew it. Meeting ended without handshakes. He didn't say goodbye. The next morning, the signed MSA arrived in my inbox at 6:03 a.m., time-stamped and clean, 2-factor verified, auto-routed through their general counsel. Subject, signed, new terms accepted. No message in the body, just silence. We never heard from Travis again. He didn't show up to the follow-up call. Rumor had it he'd been repositioned to a new internal strategy team. I imagined that meant a windowless conference room and a long leash made of nothing. But my inbox, that exploded. By noon, I had 3 inbound inquiries, all from companies in their ecosystem. Payment processors, ID platforms. One of them was a former competitor who'd once pulled out of talks with us because their CTO said we weren't scalable. Now they wanted an emergency discovery session, tonight if possible. Funny how reputations shift when the fires get big enough. I opened a new Trello board called Conversion, Scorched Earth. Liz updated our pricing page to remove all grandfathered tiers. Amir created a new endpoint/legacy recovery, and I walked into our now formal downtown office, poured myself a coffee, and sat by the window. I wasn't relationship overhead anymore. I was the relationship, the asset, the architect, the one holding the keys. And everyone who'd spent a year overlooking me, now they were asking if I had time for a call. The ballroom lights dimmed just enough to give the illusion of intimacy, like the audience and I were all in on some shared secret, one they didn't even know was about to be detonated. I stood on the main stage at the largest fintech conference on the eastern seaboard, mic clipped to my blazer, slides ready, confidence coiled like a spring. The panel was titled, Modern API Dependencies, Scaling Infrastructure Without Breaking Trust. Cute, right? 2 months had passed since the contract was signed, since Travis's empire had quietly collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. His company didn't sponsor the conference this year. No banners, no booth, no branded pens handed out by fresh-faced interns pretending to know what middleware was. Just an empty slot on the sponsor wall where their logo used to be. Someone had peeled it off, left a faint outline like a ghost of relevance. But I spotted him in the third row. No name badge, no entourage. Just him, hunched slightly in his seat, wearing the kind of half-smile that people stretch across their face when they're trying to look relaxed but internally bracing for impact. He probably thought I wouldn't notice. I noticed. I began my talk with facts, uptimes, throughput, vendor risk management. A few hard-earned jokes about incident response protocols that actually landed, got some chuckles, a nod from a CTO in the back who looked like he'd aged 6 years since COVID. But I kept it tight. Professional, smart, surgical, and then I rapped, final slide. Just a simple quote, white text on black background. The mistake most execs make. They confuse women who build bridges with women who won't burn them. I let it hang. No dramatic music, no mic drop, just gravity. A murmur rolled through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Some people laughed, nervous, approving. Others stiffened. I didn't scan the audience, didn't look for validation, but I felt his stare like a pressure point on my spine. I stepped off the stage, walked past the applause, past the congratulatory nods and LinkedIn follow requests pinging my phone like static. He didn't approach. He didn't ask a question. He didn't even blink. Just watched, frozen in his chair, like a man realizing the glacier he tried to ignore had already moved under him and crushed the foundation he built his ego on. He wouldn't recover. Not here, not now. Not when every vendor in the room had just seen who really runs the rails. Not when every slide deck now started with my face and every whisper in the hallway ended with, she's the one who, I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to humiliate him. I was the correction. And as I walked toward the side exit, one last thought slid across my brain like a match along the box. Bonuses are still for assets, darling, and I own the whole platform. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the Coffee Pot strikes again.